Okay, hello and welcome to a very special crossover episode. I'm Evan Brown with the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in DC. And I am here as usual with Bill Reinsch and Scott Miller, the CSIS Trade Guys. Today, though, we're thrilled to be joining forces with the Simply Trade podcast out of El Paso, Texas. And we're here with Lalo Solorzano and Andy Shiles, the co-hosts of the Simply Trade podcast. And they're bringing an awesome perspective on the on-the-ground work of trade compliance. So Lalo, for listeners of ours who aren't yet familiar with you guys, can you tell us just a little bit about how you all got your start and what your podcast is focused on?
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you all for arranging this. And I do need to make a real quick note here. Y'all sound funny when I listen to you on normal speed, because I usually listen to you all in 1.5 times speed. Just so you know that. But anyway,
well, you sound funny to us, Lalo. You both got Texas accents, and we're from somewhere else.
And mine is southern border too, so that's even funnier. So anyway, so we started. Global Training Center has been around for a very long time. We're 30 plus years now, but the actual podcast came about because of the pandemic, believe it or not. We go to a lot of trade shows, that address trade and all that within our industry. And all of a sudden that was gone. Even the virtual ones just didn't bring the same, it was still a little strange. So what we did is that I got this crazy idea during my pandemic walks, because remember, we all just ended up doing a lot of walks or running or exercising. But I got this idea and I said, maybe we ought to get together and talk like we do at the actual conferences. The good stuff actually comes not during the sessions, it's actually outside of the sessions when everybody's just mingling around and talking, and during lunch or drinks afterwards or whatever. And so we missed that. And I told Andy, hey, what if we try to simulate that again? And sure enough, that's what we've been doing since we're actually starting our third year in August of this year. So we're ending our third year. I'm sorry. So we've been around for 3 years, and that's how we generally got started. It's just a bunch of folks that we know and getting together and talking about trade.
Thanks, Lalo, and thanks for being here. So Scott, I'm going to turn to you, as I may or may not have been in high school when the Trade Guys got your start. So do you mind filling in the listeners?
Not at all. We're old, but not that old. But in any case, no. Well, Bill and I had worked together in a number of different roles over the years. I was before CSIS. I worked for a major company, Procter and Gamble, doing global trade policy work for them, and I was a corporate member of the National Foreign Trade Council, where Bill was the president. So we had a fair amount of collaborative time. But in 2017, Bill joined CSIS. I was already there, and in my post P&G career, and Bill came in. That was also the time that one Donald J. Trump became the president of the United States, and he had a very sort of distinctive and discontinuous effect on trade policy and trade, and especially communication about trade. Which created the opportunity for the show. We were pretty clear that there was this sort of communications mismatch. All the specialists, like Bill and myself, we understood each other because we talked in jargon and acronyms and those kinds of things. Meanwhile, the president, both candidate Trump and President Trump, was going directly to voters. And while he had compelling ideas, it wasn't clear they really understood what he was saying because they weren't familiar with context or concept. So that was the opportunity. And in 2018, we decided to get together and talk about trade in plain language. And we began kind of stale, like a lot of podcasts do. We were too long, we were too windy, and we did a lot of explaining. And then we realized one day, Bill and I were talking about sort of the reaction in Congress to the president's doings. And Bill said something about, some of these senators are pretty grumpy. And I said, if you skip the ones that are sleepy and dopey, maybe. And And that was the insight. Our then moderator, Andrew Schwartz, basically kept encouraging us to be crisp and at least try to be funny. So we modeled ourselves. Our role models were Click and Clack, the Tappet brothers, from the famous NPR call-in show Car Talk. And now we're never as funny as those guys were on their worst day. So marvelous entertainment, but it helped us get a rhythm of the show. We figured it out on the job, and so that's the rest is sort of history.
Those guys were great. I actually listened to that show and loved it. So
yeah, fantastic show. Both mechanical engineering whizzes from MIT, and they talked about our fair city, Boston, and their Dodge Darts, but got the message across. So
there you go.
They used to do reruns, particularly after one of them died, and they were fabulous to listen to. Great senses of humor, great stories. It did get a little bit weird in the aughts to have people calling in and complaining about their 1979 Nissan, or cars that were 30 years old, and this was a previous episode.
Yeah, those two are better to model yourselves than what Andy and I first started was we were thinking more like Pancho and Lefty, but
whatever works.
I don't think Evan knows the Pancho and Lefty reference here, but anyway, look it up. It's Willie Nelson.
He's too young for Willie. But so, do I get to ask which one is Lefty?
Yeah, I know. Then I heard the song and I realized maybe that's not a good comparison. But anyway, the title at least sounds cool. So,
in any case, we're delighted to have an audience these days, and people seem to like us. People seem to listen, and the idea of communicating complicated ideas in a simple manner keeps the show challenging for us. And it's really people like Evan hold us accountable to make sure we're actually talking to people in the language they both speak and understand.
Yeah, the cause and effect of some of the policies as well as the action that you have to take is what we focus on a lot of times, and trying to break that down because it gets complex. And I always tell compliance-related people, your job is to translate these complexities into more simple terms so the average guy or person or man or woman can understand it and how it relates to them. And that's one of the things I think your show has been very informative. And, Lalo and I have been real fortunate. The one thing that happens, and I'm curious from y'all's perspective, we record our show, obviously, and go through and all that. So it's hard to get the live interaction. Are we having an impact or not? And when we have done some public appearances, we are always so humbled by people coming up and going, oh man, I just love your show, or do this, or I've learned from that, or I've been able to take some action and all that. Have y'all ever seen that as well whenever you've been out and about?
I get it all the time, but it can be humbling. I was approached by somebody at a reception who said, I'm a big fan. I listen all the time. And I made the mistake of asking, when do you listen? Like when you're commuting, or when you're exercising. And he said, no, I put the earbuds in when I'm going to bed. And so I discovered that we're also a cure for insomnia.
We do manage 2 or 3 live audience events a year, and it does keep us sharp. We recently did one with the Bankers for International Trade and American Banking Association division. Had a great reception. We almost convinced our very conservative nonprofit sector bosses that we really needed Trade Guys merch. That there was a market for bobbleheads and trucker hats and coffee mugs, but we haven't quite gotten there yet.
And true to the tradition, the American made bobblehead was going to be $5.99, and the Chinese one was going to be $1.99. Yeah. So take your choice.
I love it. Well, Evan, you better jump in there and take control of us, buddy.
I was going to say,
get back to work.
Maybe we should talk about trade a little bit. So what we're going to try to do today is to take this awesome hands-on experience that Andy and Lalo have, mix it with the trade guys, DC policymaker perspectives, and we're going to start by zeroing in on the de minimis exemption, which many listeners will know exempted international shipments valued at most recently $800 from tariffs, many customs procedures. And I say exempted in the past tense because President Trump eliminated this exemption in a July 30th executive order. And I believe it will come into effect before this podcast comes out. Is that correct?
Tonight at midnight. We're recording on August 28th. So it goes into effect midnight on the 29th.
So, Andy, maybe we'll start with you. Can you tell us just a bit more about what de minimis is and why it's important to you and to the people you're working with?
Well, de minimis is one of those things where the term itself means that the value of the goods was so low, it's not worth going through an entry process for the government or the private sector. So the government would go through a manifest process, if you will. I'm oversimplifying it, but basically would be able to clear documents and then non-document commodities that were valued below. In this case, it was below 800. It used to be $50, then it went up to 200, and then up to 800. And so rather than doing an informal entry or a formal entry, it was done through a manifest process, and basically it was duty and tax free. It was de minimis. It was like low value, and we go from there. The challenge now is that with the elimination, well, let's back up a minute. What's caused the issue here is like, why is de minimis going away? Well, one of the things that's happened, de minimis was predominantly used by the post office, and then secondarily to that by the express carriers, FedEx, UPS, DHL in particular. There's a lot of others. What happened is with the advent of the e-commerce, evolution and really accelerated by the pandemic, because nobody could really go out, so everybody's ordering things online, was the proliferation of other companies that were utilizing the Section 321 or the de minimis process. And so these massive containers in particular that was all e-commerce, a lot of them out of the China with the Shein and the Temu and whoever else. And there were other companies that did things. They would take advantage of this. And so let's say if you ordered a car part, if you ordered, some little item or whatever, clothing, whatever, all these different things, if it's less than $800, they would go through this process. Well, thousands upon thousands of shipments every day would come in. And actually it got to the point where, I don't know if y'all realize this or not, but there's 5.5 million de minimis valued shipments a day rolling into the US. And customs wasn't prepared for that. So as all that went through, then there were some folks that were basically running things that would have qualified for anti-dumping or countervailing duty situations. They were undervaluing goods. They were all doing all kinds of stuff. So there was all these things that were going on. And keep in mind also, the U.S. had a 800 or less de minimis, but other countries didn't. Their de minimis was really low, including like Canada's was as low as 20, or then it went to 40, and then it went back down. And other countries did not have the same thing. So U.S. e-commerce businesses, especially, Scott, you mentioned the small business person, they were at a disadvantage to foreigners as far as being able to ship and going back and forth. So in a sense, that's kind of where we're at, I guess. I don't know if that helps answer where you were going, Evan.
Well, let me ask a question about that. I think, tell us a little bit about what your, do you call them clients or customers or people you work with are experiencing in the run up to this going away. My impression is that what is going to happen is what usually happens, which is the big guys find a way to deal with it, and the small guys get hosed. Is that what's going to happen, or is it going to play out differently?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can start by saying that yes, you're right. The big guys have and will be able to deal with it because they can consolidate and bring in shipments. So there's two ways that now you can bring in the shipment, and very technical, but really high level. Type 01 or type 11. So type 01 is a formal entry. Type 11 is an informal entry. But those are only qualify for $2,500 or less. The type ones are pretty much anything. So how are they going to be avoiding this? Is that not, and I shouldn't say avoiding, because there's no avoiding it. I mean, you're still going to pay the duties, but it's easier for them, and because they can consolidate larger shipments and bring them in under their own name, under they're the importer record. Whereas me, let's say I had an Etsy shop and I was shipping a bunch of products, $10, and I have 250 clients. Well, lucky for me, now they're all $2,500. I can bring them in under type 11, but that still brings a lot of issues for me, because I'm not consolidating in the U.S. in a warehouse, unless I probably get like a 3PL or someone else that might help me consolidate and bring it in as an informal entry. But then again, now that I'm going to have to list 250 lines on the entry, so that's a mess. Again, of course, the bigger guys will be able to get around it. And again, I shouldn't be using that word to get around it. They just can deal with it better. Let's just say that. I don't know if you have anything else to say.
So really what you're saying is for people in the business of bringing goods into the country, this is going to be an enormous paperwork burden.
There you go. That right there is, let me say this, is that prior to all of this, we also had a scenario where people would send samples to companies, unsolicited samples. Well, it would cause a nightmare from an import perspective for companies, because this stuff would come in, it was classified, all over the place. The compliance people would find out about it on the back end, or when something showed up. And we're talking low value items, so it was just a paperwork and compliance nightmare. Well, now with the advent of the de minimis, all that came through, wasn't a problem. Well, here now we eliminate the de minimis. Guess what? All that starts over again. Bill, you're right on the money. It's going to create another paperwork nightmare for the private company. But here's something else: 5.5 million shipments a day. And all of that was not in the customs entry system through AMS and all these, or ACE. Now it's going to be, all of that's going to flood into customs system. So then you've got basically the vast majority are going to be informal entries, whether they're a consolidated informal, which you take a bunch of informal valued shipments, put them in through that process, or your broker or yourself will send an individual type 11, as we're talking about, 11 entry. So you have all of that hitting custom system. So in a sense, you're going to have, it's kind of like, have you ever seen out on an airport and you're traveling and you got all the aircraft that are lined up to take off, and you got a little bitty aircraft in front of a 747, let's say. And that 747 can't take off or move until that little aircraft gets going and out of the way, right? You're going to have these small shipments as far as data. And granted, I'm oversimplifying it again, but you can imagine all these small shipments are in the way of these larger, formal, very expensive entries. All of that's got to be processed. The system will process it, but then it's also got to be reviewed by, manual agents and whatnot in the process. So they're going to get flooded. So we'll see what the shakeout is on this. But the other side of this is to turn off the spigot of those that have been taking advantage of the U.S. processes. And in the end, the question is, does the U.S. consumer really, they may be getting a short-term benefit, but in the long term and behind it, it's at the sacrifice of maybe U.S. exports or unfair trade practices with other countries.
Something that I'm thinking back of the original debates in Congress on this in 2015, of course, pre-COVID. And your point about things are really different than anybody anticipated is absolutely the case. In fact, I remember the 2015 debates because as an Ohio company, we noted our two senators worked together on this, Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown.
And that's unusual too, wasn't it?
Which they don't have a lot in common, but seeing them work together was a great assurance to many of us that this was going to be a sound piece of legislation. And indeed, Customs promoted the legislation. They were supportive of it because they thought it would help them with risk management, and it probably did. But I think, Andy, you make the point that none of us anticipated what might happen, both in fast fashion or, more importantly, in COVID and the movement out of bricks and mortar retailing into online selling and direct customer shipment.
Here's something else, though, that I think that was unfortunate. I think we still need the de minimis, in my personal opinion. I actually was involved during my FedEx days in helping write and lobby, if you will, to raise the de minimis with others in the industry. But the one thing I will say is there are requirements that are put on the express carriers for customs to be on site. You have to have electronic manifest systems. They'll look through the manifest and do their selections. And the express carriers are very good at being able to process these all came in, they're fine. These are slotted for exam. They get moved over during the sort system and all that. The post office, unfortunately, has been utilizing postal regs to compete in the private sector, but yet there again, the post office still gets to enjoy the benefits of de minimis. I'm not sure they really still have any of the processing power that they need through systems to handle that, but that's a separate issue. The downside is that anybody else that was bringing this in, here's where I wish that had happened, is that as these things are growing, the same requirements that are put on the express carriers should have been put on these companies that were bringing in these massive containers full of all these de minimis shipments. Hey, if you're going to do this, we're not doing this manually. You got to do this electronically, and we need to see this ahead of time, and we need to make the selections, and you need to have a sort facility. Instead, these things came in, and they would hand customs, if you will, the equivalent of a computer printout and said, here's our manifest, here's what's on the in our container. Well, they're not going to be able to go through all that and do it, well. So I will say, unfortunately, CBP got caught flat-footed. The government as a whole did, and is behind. And this is kind of a knee-jerk reaction in this. So in looking at it, I think what's going to happen is, as atypical, you have a policy that is done in reaction to certain things. It's the pendulum effect, right? So we go from one extreme to the other, and hopefully it'll come back to the center, and we'll be able to work through some of this.
Of course, it's also worth noting that, like everything else in the trade business these days, this is being litigated. Trump is being sued. The initial finding of the Court of International Trade regarding the president's use of IEPA encompassed this, because he used IEPA to impose the ending of de minimis in the first instance. Subsequently, the one big beautiful bill contains actually a statutory repeal of de minimis, but that's not effective until July 1, 2027. So the idea of the bill, I think, actually made sense, which is phase in. You've got 2 years to get ready to figure out how to develop procedures at CBP or at the Postal Service to accommodate what's going to happen. Instead, the president ignored that and went ahead with his executive orders, terminating everything tonight. So, and I think you're quite right. Nobody's ready for this. The government's not ready. The importers aren't ready. The retailers, I think, are not ready. So it's going to be a giant mess, which in turn was one of the reasons for the lawsuit. It'll be resolved, I think, in the fall. In fact, any day now, we're expecting a decision from the appellate level, because they held the hearing at the the end of July, so it's usually, around a month when they issue an opinion. So stay tuned for an opinion. I mean, no matter what happens, it'll go to the Supreme Court. So many more months, but it'll point the direction of what's going to happen here, which of course raises another issue, which is if the president loses, then everybody gets their money back, at least in theory. And then you've got the question of how is that going to work? How is the Customs Service going to refund all that money with interest? And are they prepared to do that?
It is a domino effect that's unreal. I will say, though, here's something that you were talking about the IEPA, and I understand this. Let's back away from whatever prerogative. Here's the thing that I see that Trump's trying to do. First off, I don't know if y'all agree with this or not. In my personal opinion, I see this. U.S. goods have not been treated fairly for decades around the world. So, and I will say this more, and I'm talking about fair trade, not free trade. So the biggest in a short-term answer is, for example, Germany. Germany has the largest percentage of their GDP tied to exports. 45% of their economy is tied to exports. And they export, let's say, a Mercedes, BMW, Porsche. Let's take a $100,000 Mercedes. It comes into the U.S. and is imported in. The duties and taxes on that are going to be roughly 3.5%, give or take a little bit.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I get that. But to your point, here's the other thing. You take a Cadillac, a $100,000 Cadillac manufactured in the U.S., you ship it to Germany, and the duties and taxes on that are about 35%. Well, now, wait a minute. Is that fair? No. They have full access to the U.S., but going over there, the U.S. goods now are restricted, if you will, in a sense, due to a higher tariff rate. So when we're looking at it, the U.S. still has to compete on price, cycle times, quality, all those things, just like everybody else. That's where I'm looking at it going, well, I see what Trump's trying to do. We're in this transition trying to negotiate that, whatever privileges or provisions, we're almost splitting hairs because the issue is we're so focused on just the import side. Well, what about the export side? And that's where I think that if we balance that, I think we'll see some benefits here.
Yeah, I have to disagree with you in part. I did a column on this a while back. Those numbers are based on the fact that Europe, I'm going to screw this up when I go through it, but it's based on the fact that Europe has a value-added tax,
right,
and the United States doesn't, and the value-added tax is rebated on exports. So Trump, among others, thinks that this is inherently unfair. If you work through the numbers, the real difference, and really the only difference, is the difference in tariffs, not the difference in the value-added tax. Because let's take a $50,000 car, okay? Mm-hmm. So there are probably no $50,000 Mercedes, but if there were one, you've got a $50,000 Mercedes. When it's sold in Germany, it sells for $50,000 plus the VAT. The VAT is a national tax. It's not an EU tax. All members have them, but they range in value from 15 to 27%.
Right.
Let's take a middle ground, 20%. So the $50,000 car sold in Europe would be $60,000 with a 20% VAT, right? Okay.
$10,000 VAT. Yeah.
Yes, at 20%. That's hypothetical. It's all hypothetical.
Right.
So that car then is shipped to the United States for export. There's no VAT, or there is, but it's rebated. So it arrives in the United States at 50, and what happens to it is it pays them, in the absence of Trump, it pays 2.5%, our MFN tariff, plus local sales tax, and which varies also by state. But let's say pick one, 5%. So that means that car in the United States is going to be what, 52.5, 53.5, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so actually, pre-Trump tariffs, I think less than it costs in Germany. Now go the other way. The U.S. car, the U.S. $50,000 car sold in the U.S. is $50,000 plus U.S. sales tax. So whatever that happens to be, it's the same as for the imported car. So the difference between the two prices in the United States is the amount of the tariff. The European car is 2.5% more than the American car. So you ship the American car to Europe, and what happens in Europe? It's a $50,000 car. It pays the VAT. So that makes it a $60,000 car. Okay. Well, that's what the Mercedes was in Germany when it was sold there. There's no difference, except that the American car also pays in the before times a 10% tariff on top of the VAT. Mm-hmm. So, which makes the American car $5,000 more expensive than the German car in Germany. But the point is, of all that long, confusing description, is that the difference in pricing is due to entirely the tariff differential. Mm-hmm. There's nothing inherently unfair in what the Germans or any other European country does. The difference is that they have a 10% tariff on cars, and we have a 2.5%. Now, as it's going forward, if the administration keeps its word, the Europeans will only have a 15% tariff here, and we'll still be paying the VAT there. But does that right or wrong? You have to make your own judgment about that. But the difference has always not been due to, it has been due simply to tariff differentials.
Mm-hmm. Well, but that's what I'm saying is that in trying to balance out the trade and the basically of fair access to each other's markets. I mean, Brazil and India are two, and I understand. I mean, the most recent Trump thing on 50% of Brazilian goods, that's a whole nother issue. I was talking about beforehand and where we got, to this.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying is if we had both gone to zero, there would be no difference.
Right.
On tariffs. The 50% thing is, the thing to look at with the big ones is how much the real impact is. There was a very interesting study by the Bank of Nova Scotia. This is about Canada, not Brazil, but in theory, Trump bumped that one up to 35%. But in that case, it doesn't apply to items that are USMCA compliant.
Right.
So the Bank of Nova Scotia estimated that the real tariff on Canadian stuff coming in the United States is on average 7%, because most of it comes in free. The Brazilians estimated, I think, numbers, I don't know, 13 or 15%, something like that, not 50, because the biggest exports they make to us, including iron ore, Trump exempted. Iron ore, orange juice, a number of other items, not coffee, incidentally.
Well, back to de minimis.
Sorry for wandering off.
Yes. Boy, did we could take
We'll get a visiting angel to make sure Bill's all right.
I haven't had my coffee today, though.
But there are always asymmetries in trade politics, and there are always unforeseen consequences. And Andy, you identified with de minimis massive unforeseen consequence of the movement to home delivery in retailing and how that affected it. There's been an asymmetry in politics for a long time because there's always been opponents to the higher de minimis. The light industrial goods makers, many of them in the Southeast United States. If you look at our U.S. tariff schedule pre-Trump, there were only a handful of lines that were around 10% MFN tariff. And those were light industrials, apparel, footwear, to the extent it exists anymore, small appliances, hand tools, things like that. And those groups have always been vigorously opposed to de minimis from its very start. They were opposed in 2015 when the Congress raised the levels, and they were kind of a ready-made constituent to go against it. The asymmetry came is because there's a lot of beneficiaries of de minimis that have never been heard from. The small shipper. My daughter's sells patterns on Etsy. She makes kind of cross stitch patterns as a hobby, but she's an Etsy seller, and she has international customers. De minimis allows returns to happen very easily, but this will, taking it away, will be a burden to those individual sellers. So, but once again, asymmetry happens all the time in trade politics.
Yeah, the back and forth. I mean, you're right on the money. I think we're going to get into seeing the impact, and it's like this big rock has been thrown into the pond. We got to see where the ripples go, how far they go. Do they die out quickly, or is it, going to wash out some things here? So it's back to the samples again. I come back to that. The returns, you're right on the money with that. All these different things are going on, and again, here's the other thing. What about the reciprocal actions on other countries? Are they going to cut their de minimis off for U.S. And those kinds of things? So again, we don't know quite where this is at right now, and have to look at it.
It's getting towards time to wrap up. I haven't done quite as good a job of keeping you all in line as I hoped.
You should have interrupted my rant. So
I thought about it.
Both of us. I mean, Bill and I can go on all kinds of stuff.
But I do want to give Lalo the last word. And Andy, you were talking about throwing a rock into the pond. So I want to just take a broad look at the pond. You all are talking to businesses who are dealing with this stuff every day. We now have, trade deals with most of our major trade partners. I guess what I'm looking for is, can you assess the mood in the business community? Are we still at an all-time high of uncertainty, or are things coming down a little bit?
I feel that a lot of our clients, let's say, or people we talk to or even deal with, whether they're clients or not, but we mostly deal with the practitioners, the importers, exporters. I mean, a lot of brokers, and what I'm seeing mostly is that they are now adapting to what the norm is going to be. So. Sure, there are high tariffs and duties, and Bill made a good point about saying about the EPA and being challenged in the CIT. It's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Everybody knows it is, because whoever loses is going to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. We had a guest on our podcast that was a former litigator with the Department of Justice. Now he's on the flip side. Now he's with the trade. He's in private practice, and he said it's very likely that the administration is going to lose. It's very, very likely he's going to lose. But the way I've been looking at it is, and I don't know if everybody else in the trade industry is looking at it this way also, is that it's funny how it almost seems like we're settling on 15% tariffs. I mean, it almost looks like 15% is a norm. And I might have heard it also on your podcast or other podcasts or wherever. But the reality is it's almost like 15%. Everybody's getting comfortable with that. I personally feel, and maybe the trade industry does also, is because if Trump does lose and he cannot do these IEPAs and all these reciprocals because of the reasons that he's doing, is because he can resort to 122, for example. 122 caps it at 15%. So in my opinion, I feel that maybe that's what the industry is getting adapted to. I mean, yes, it is still a headache. It is still a lot of problems, but when we go to conferences or in public and we talk to folks and we just try to get their input, the consensus is, well, let's just deal with it. Let's deal with what we have now. There's no point in arguing or fighting about this, because as you all know, right now, anything that gets done, it's getting done very untraditionally. It used to take 30, 60, 90 days. You would go through Congress, there was hearings, there was all kinds of input from the public. But nowadays it's more, I mean, as I think someone said here earlier as well, it's through a tweet, or I guess not a tweet, but whatever, a post somewhere, and it just happens, that you kind of bypass that, the way things are done now. So I mean, what can you do? You might as well just wait. So that is what I feel might be the consensus or the overall attitude or from folks and our side of the business.
Well, you're right. You're exactly right. I think there's always a new equilibrium. People moan and whine at change, and then they figure out what to do. The analogy we've used is not throwing the rock in the pond, but throwing the rock in the river, and the water just finds a way around it. And that's what happens. But that doesn't mean there's no cost. They're going to find a way around it, but it's going to be 15% more expensive.
Yeah. And Lalo, I think you're exactly right as to why the 15% is going to stick. But first, there's actually a statute there in the 74 Trade Act, I believe it is, for balance of payments issues. And so that helps it. But the other thing is, 15% sort of universal tariff does not change the comparative position of competitive countries. So Thailand will take 15% into the U.S. as long as Indonesia has it too, or Malaysia. Okay, and so because it's a flat tariff, universal tariff, it's less objectionable to individual partners. They're less likely to object to it. So then the third point is Congress loves that tariff revenue, and it's rolling in, and they're delighted to see it. So all the more reason to anticipate.
Yeah, the comparative situation is really important. I think if you talk to the Koreans heading into their summit, the really important thing was to make sure they were the same as Japan.
Yeah, not lose ground.
And the Taiwanese objective right now, because they're at 20, is exactly the same, to be the same as Japan and Korea. And if you look at Southeast Asia, they're all within a point or two of 19 or 20. And that was important. Nobody wants to be the worst. Mm-hmm. And in a way, the administration has kind of has accommodated that anxiety. I don't know if it was deliberate or accidental, but it seems to be coming out that way. But very few are, so far the only people below 15 are the UK, Singapore, and Australia.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let me jump in real quick and just say, because we're running long on time, I will say that to both of our listeners, both shows listeners.
I hope we have more than two listeners.
That's just two.
Our show's two listeners.
Our two listeners. All right,
one of them.
Yeah. But in looking at it is two things. One that you were asking is like, what's the reaction and the uncertainty? What's happening is I see there are a lot of groups that are getting overwhelmed, especially, the import-export compliance groups. But, they need to be tying in with the sourcing groups, because a lot of folks are looking at changing sourcing or coming up with scenarios, the logistics, transportation folks in there and all that. Having folks look at different scenarios in this is depleting resources away from their normal jobs. So executive management needs to be looking at bolstering the staffing. Don't look at it and go, why are you needing more? It's like, well, to research all this and respond back to upper management, they've got to be having some help. So come alongside that is one thing. But the second thing is, as the dust settles, also in looking at what should the private sector be lobbying for, or trying to work through trade associations to say what policies should we be pushing for or changing and whatever else. And that's where I would say, again, in looking at these, our two shows would probably help pinpoint what's going on or where you should be in getting involved. So that'd be the two things as far as takeaways. Bolster your staffing for your folks so they can do the research and respond to you. And secondly, listen to the policies and figure out where you need to get involved in trade associations to affect change.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. And I'll plus one that and say, go ahead. And if you're not a subscriber of both the Trade Guys podcast and the Simply Trade podcast, go do that wherever you find your podcast. Thank you, Lalo. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Scott. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.